Hello, Steve Schaller from TriStar Data Systems here with a Timeslips tutorial. Today we're going to talk about some shortcuts for speeding up the process of slip entry. So let's jump into the slip entry window and look at what we have here. So the first thing I want to talk about is selecting clients. So we're in a sample database here, so there's only a handful of clients, but if you're at a larger firm where you have a long client list of maybe hundreds of clients, one thing you can do is use a feature called My Lists. So if you right click on the client field in the slip entry, or pretty much anywhere where you have a list of clients, you may notice these two options here of My Clients and All Clients. And if we select My Clients and then again hit the drop down, we notice we have a much shorter list of clients and this handy reminder that some names may be hidden due to My List settings. And that was a nice feature that was added recently, as that sometimes confused people. And so it just gives us a nice shortcut to trim down our list of clients and make selecting clients a lot easier. So how do you configure that list? So we go to each timekeeper can set up their own My List with your short list of clients. So the way we do that is we go up to Names and then Timekeeper Info. And I'm in the sample database and logged in as D. Brickley. So if we go into D. Brickley, or any timekeeper really, we'll see this page for My List setup, where you can choose both client and activity selection. So if we click the selection button here, you could just choose client selection here and check off the clients that you want to be on your list, and that's the easiest way to do it. And you could go back to this list maybe at the beginning of each week and sort of reset your list for the clients that you're going to be working on that week. But if again you have a long list of clients and don't want to have to go through that process every week, what I've done here is use the client custom field. So if we quickly look, we'll get out of this screen real quick and go to the client screen, we have a client custom field called responsible that assigns the responsible timekeeper for that particular client. And so now we can use that custom field to drive our My List. So that's what I've done here. I've gone in and into my selection for My List. I've gone to client, or you could go to all. It's going to be the same here. And I'll take it out just so you can see how it works. And I've selected client responsible. And then I want to select, in this case, myself as D. Brickley. And so any clients where I am as D. Brickley, the responsible timekeeper, they will automatically become part of My List. So I don't have to go in and manage this each week. Anytime somebody assigns me as the responsible timekeeper on a client, it will be added to My List. And so now when I go to enter time, I've got this nice short list of clients that I know are the clients that I am responsible for. And if I do need to enter time for somebody else who's outside of that list, I can always right click and choose all clients and get back to my full list. So that's tip number one. Moving down through the fields on the slip entry screen, we may notice that there's quite a few fields that we are consistently skipping over and not filling in a lot of cases. For example, the reference field. Some firms don't use that, this extra field. If you don't use certain fields on the slip entry screen, or really anywhere in Timeslips, you can disable those features that that aren't useful to you. So let's take a look at how we can do that. So I'm going to close the slip screen. I'm going to go to Setup at the top and choose Features Enabled. And so almost any feature in Timeslips can be easily enabled and disabled. And you can disable a feature and you don't lose data. If you had some slips that had references or something filled into that extra field, just by disabling that field, you're not going to lose that data. You're basically just hiding it. So we can go to the slips section here and see all the fields that can be found in slip entry. So any of these fields that I don't want to use, I can just uncheck these boxes, and it really cleans up the slip entry and makes it faster to get through it. And so I'm going to take off that extra field. I'm going to take off the end date field. I'm going to take off the time estimated field. And so the reference field is, we'll have to go here to reference to disable that. And so I'll disable that as well. But make sure that that's not a field that you're using. And so now I'll click OK here, and it just kind of warns me about what I'm doing and are you sure that you want to do that? And I'm going to say yes. And so now if I go back to my slip list, I've got this nice lean, mean entry platform that I can get through a lot quicker. I've got my client, my task, and then directly into description, I've got my start date and my time spent, and I've gotten rid of a lot of the junk that I'm just having to skip over every time. So that's a feature that I really love and will often set up for my clients. So moving down now into the description field, let's talk about some ways to make your entering your descriptions quicker, as that's probably the time where you'll spend the most typing. And one of my favorite ways to use the description field is abbreviations. So let's go back to the setup menu and choose abbreviations. So abbreviations allow us to type 2 or 3 or 4 characters, and then when we hit the space bar, expand that into a sentence or phrase. So we can see in the sample database there are a handful already set up. So the token in the left column here is what you would type. So if you type CC, it will expand to conference with client concerning. And so let's add a new abbreviation. So I'll type LTOC, letter, and this will expand to letter to opposing counsel. And we could end there. In this case, I just want to show you sort of all the features that we have. So in the bottom here, there's this insert prompt. So if in addition to just putting that text in, you want to, say, add a person's name or something more specific to what you're talking about, you can have it prompt you to, say, enter claimant name. And so now, so that it puts the percent sign before and after that. And so that's how it knows that that's a prompt. So now if I click OK here and click Done, and back to my slip entry window, if I type LTOC and hit the space bar, now it gives me that prompt, and I can type John Smith, and I capitalize my O because I typed too fast. So let's fix that, and that's a little spell check feature. And when I click OK, now I have a sentence there with a couple clicks. So that's abbreviations, and that's a really nice feature. So the next time-saving tip I want to look at is preferences. So on the bottom right side of our toolbar, there's this options button. which will take us into our personal preferences. So now, the settings that we've looked at so far, well, my list is specific to each user. The features enabled is going to affect everyone that uses your database. And the abbreviations can either be shared between everybody in your firm, or you can make a personal list. But personal preferences are just for you. Each user can have their own preferences file and make things work as they want it to. So when I click the options button from the slip entry window, it takes me into the slips section of preferences, where there are 4 separate areas that can affect slip entry. So in the first part here, the one that probably is most useful to you is this show time in slips as decimal. So by default, Timeslips will show your time as hours, minutes, and seconds. But I know a lot of people, particularly lawyers, work in, or at least think in, decimals, and usually 0.6 of an hour or 10 minutes. So if you type 0.6 in that field, it will automatically convert it, or if you do 0.1, it will convert it to 6 minutes. I'm sorry. But if you want it, and it changes the display back to hours, minutes, and seconds, even if you type it that way. But if you want it to display still as decimal, you can click that option to show time in slips as decimal, and it will, I need to close out of that slip and go back into a new slip. And now if I type 0.1, it will stay that way. So let's look at a couple of the other little preferences thing in some of these other areas. So slip list just controls the order of the way you see things. The slip entry, I think, is where it gets really interesting. So first you can choose the order that the fields appear in. Basically, your choice is just whether client is at the top or task is at the top. Personally, and timekeeper is always at the top, but then the next field can either be client or task. And then you can choose whether your save button and new buttons are on the right side, the left side, the top, or the bottom. So again, that's pretty minor. Then when you get down to this next area, your tab order, this is especially useful if you don't do that features enabled step that we talked about and disable those fields. You can set your tab order so that it sort of skips those fields so if you're just tabbing through your timekeeper, your client, your task, your description, and then you want it to get to the date and skip the end date or something like that, you can set the order of your fields by moving the fields up and down here. You can also select hotkeys. So if you select, say, your timekeeper and you want to immediately jump to the date, so I've set up a hotkey of F1 for my start date. So let's see how that works. So if I select my timekeeper and I hit the F1 key, I immediately jump down to the date. And so you can set a hotkey for any of the fields in slip entry and quickly jump between the fields. So if you know your start date is F1, your time spent is F2, your description is F3, you can jump between them real quickly. You can also just check this jump box for any of the fields, and the F7 key will move between any of the fields that you have set as jump. So if I we have description checked here, and let's choose time spent as another key. So if I go back to my slip and I'm in the description and I hit F7, it jumps to time spent. If I hit F7 again, it jumps back to the description box. And let's take one more look now back in the options at the new slip rules. So this controls what happens when you create a new slip simply by pressing the plus sign on the slip or using your navigator to create a new slip. So the first choice is to create new slips for the logged in timekeeper. So a lot of people will set security so that you can only enter time for yourself, and that timekeeper field would be grayed out such that you can only enter time for yourself. But if that is not set up in your database and you want it to always default to entering time for yourself, you can check that box and it will always default to entering time for you. The second choice is pull data from open dialogues when creating new slips. So if I have, say, the client list open and I click on any client here, say Seacoast, and I go to create a new slip, it will automatically fill that client in because I had that client selected in another window. And just a few more things to show you here. Now this section is which fields copy from one slip to another. So a client just asked me earlier this morning about tasks and if they had to use tasks on slips. And I said, unfortunately, you do have to use tasks, but if you set that task to copy from one slip to the next, it will always just keep that task filled in, and if you don't really care about what the task is anyway, it will just fill in the last task that you used. And if you've noticed throughout the tutorial here, that task has just always been filled in because it's been copying from the last slip I entered. And so I find this is particularly handy with dates if you are entering backdated slips. So if your role is to enter time for multiple people at your firm, say, and they give you a sheet to type in or dictate something, and so you're entering time from a couple days ago, if you leave that dates box unchecked, the date will always revert back to the current date. But if you check that date, it will, with each new slip, it will copy the date from the previous slip, so you don't have to keep setting that back to the date that you're entering for. So those are some great preferences settings on to speed up your time entry. The last thing that I want to talk about is taking a closer look at the spell check and grammar check, which I mentioned briefly when I had a little spelling mistake. But so if I type some garbage, we'll see some red text there, and I think I have the sound turned off on my computer audio, but I heard a ding there, and that might have come through the microphone. And so if we go up to setup and preferences, and go to spelling and grammar and choose general, we can choose check for spelling errors as you type, check for grammar errors as you type, visually indicate errors, and audibly indicate errors. And so if I if I do something like that and spell some things wrong and capitalize things that shouldn't be capitalized, the text will turn red and you'll hear a sound. And so I can now either highlight specific words, or I can just right click and say spell check current word, spell check entire field, and the same with grammar check. And so if I say spell check current word, it will come up with a suggestion for me, and I can change it. And the same here. And I just want to not capitalize that L. And now it fixed all my spelling mistakes, so we don't have to worry about that coming up on the bill with a bunch of garbage. So those are some time-saving tips for entering your slips. Hope you got something out of this. I've been Steve Schaller from TriStar Data Systems. Please contact me if you have questions about time slip entry or anything else in time slips. I'd be happy to help you. Thanks for watching.